Good evening. Welcome to everyone attending this webinar, including our presenters. My name is Adam Davey. I'm the CEO of the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust. We're based in Canberra, Ngunnawal country, and I'm going to begin this information session with an overview of what Churchill Fellowships are, what they're all about, how you go about applying, and some information and tips about the sorts of things that we're looking for. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge Australia's First Nations people, the traditional custodians of this land, and I'd like to pay my respects to all elders, past, present and emerging, and to also extend that to all Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander people who are watching this session this evening. A little bit of housekeeping. You will be able to submit questions via the Q&A function in your Zoom app. And we'll address the questions at the end of the session. If we're getting a lot of questions, I might just sneak in and answer some of the easier ones to answer in writing. Everyone will have access to see questions that are asked. You can ask them anonymously if you want to, or you can use your name, we don't mind. If you miss the opportunity to ask a question or to have a question answered, or you just think of one later on, you can contact the Trust during business hours or via social media or through our website, and we're always happy to talk to you and answer your questions. There will be a poll appearing shortly we'd like you to quickly fill out. We're interested in where you come from, so what state or territory you're based in, and also where did you hear about this information session. So that would be really helpful if you could just fill that out for us. So a little bit of history about Churchill Fellowships doesn't go astray, and I'm often asked about the history of the Trust and where we've come from and where our funding comes from. So when Sir Winston Churchill resigned as British Prime Minister in 1955 at the age of 80. He'd served under 5 reigning monarchs. He'd survived 3 wars. He'd been a writer, an historian, an adventurer, a painter. He'd even won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1953. And as you can imagine, not that long after World War II, there was a widespread desire to honour Sir Winston Churchill and capture the essence of his public service, his inspiration, his intellect, and even his humour for generations to come. And we acknowledge that Sir Winston Churchill wasn't perfect, especially when you look through today's lens. And if you go to our website, you can explore some essays that we've commissioned in the About Sir Winston section, which really address and explore Sir Winston Churchill through a contemporary lens. But one thing's for sure, he was someone that believed anything was possible if you put your mind to it, and that the greatest figures in history would be those people who made a contribution to public service and their fellow countrymen. So when Sir Robert Menzies, who was Prime Minister at the time, announced the news of Sir Winston's death to the Australian public in January 1965, he simultaneously announced a public fundraising appeal to establish the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust and to establish these things called Churchill Fellowships. And on what we call Churchill Memorial Sunday, which was the 28th of February 1965, that door-to-door public fundraising appeal was launched. It was quite incredible. Over 220,000 people participated in door knocking and collecting money and organising, and about £2.2 million was raised. So that's about $4 million in today's money. So it goes in history, I think, is one of the most successful public fundraising appeals or one-day appeals we've had. Banks opened on a Sunday to collect the money. So that's the kind of support that this had. So we kind of think about Churchill Fellowships and the trust as being the people's trust. There was such public support for the concept. So if you have a passion for a subject you wish to investigate overseas, and you know what you're striving to achieve, and you have a desire to make a difference in your industry or your community, then a Churchill Fellowship might be something for you. So the attributes of a Churchill Fellow, people ask, well, what is a Churchill Fellow? What do they look like? I think, first and foremost, a Churchill Fellowship could look like anybody. you know, including yourself. Churchill Fellows are the types of people who are passionate and they're committed to an issue, and they want to learn and share that knowledge with others so their community might benefit. So if you're motivated to bring about change and improve outcomes for the people or the planet, then consider applying. We're looking for people with ideas that they can implement on their return, and people who are in a position to put knowledge and skills into action. So in terms of Churchill Fellowships themselves, it's a unique and prestigious opportunity that is open to Australians from all walks of life. So it's important to realise it's not an academic scholarship, so you don't need to have any particular educational attainment to apply. So it's amazing. It doesn't matter if you finish year 10, it doesn't matter if you have a PhD. You're all entitled and welcome to apply. It's not a funding grant. It's way more empowering than a funding grant. There's a lot of freedom that comes with the Churchill Fellowship. You'll hear a bit about that. So it's more than a study abroad trip. It's an opportunity to become an expert in your field and start a lifelong journey and your contribution to make Australia better. A Churchill Fellowship doesn't need to comprise formal research. It can, but it doesn't need to. You can learn new skills, undertake a course, some training. You can build networks and observe best practice in your chosen field or area of interest. The fellowship is for overseas travel only and must be between 4 to 8 weeks and taken in one continuous journey. But I'm going to speak about some recent changes there. So I'll probably contradict myself just slightly. We've awarded around 4,500 Churchill Fellowships since we were established in 1965, and each year we aim to award around 100 more in Australia. And Churchill Fellows just really travel the globe on the widest range and depth of topics, and they bring back to this country information, networks, projects, products, ideas, and innovations to make this country stronger. You have to be an Australian citizen or a permanent resident of Australia and aged 18 by the application closing date to apply. So the closing date for applications this year will be 1 May. The ability to travel overseas is obviously something that we're looking for. However, we can provide support for you. For example, if you have a disability and you require a carer to travel with you, we can accommodate that in the funding for your fellowship. We also now are offering virtual research options for people who cannot travel, perhaps through disability or caring responsibilities. Travel just on a plane overseas just might not be feasible or, in fact, desirable. So you can apply to do what we're calling a virtual fellowship, which is using this kind of technology, which you're all familiar with now, thanks to COVID, and have virtual meetings. And during COVID, we had a lot of fellowship recipients who couldn't travel, and quite a few of them wanted to get on with their projects and undertook their fellowships using virtual technology, and they did great jobs, and they were very good. So I think it is something to consider if travel is a problem for you. For people living in very remote parts of Australia, we've recognised the difficulties and the challenges some people face travelling outside of their communities. So therefore, travel within Australia could have significant benefits for them and for their communities. So if that's you, if you live in a very remote part of Australia and you're thinking, well, look, I'd love to do a Churchill Fellowship, but really my journey should start in Australia. That's where I need to learn. I don't need to go overseas. I'm not there yet. Get in touch with us at the Trust and we'll have a chat to you about how that might work, because we're definitely interested in supporting people in that situation. A Churchill Fellowship is an individual project. It's not a team project. So, I guess quite often we get research teams or project teams that all want to apply as a team. You can't do that. An individual applies for the fellowship. Keeping that in mind, another relatively new thing that we're offering is a joint application between 2 people. So not a team. Well, I suppose you could call it a team of 2, an Indigenous and a non-Indigenous applicant. So that's where the project is primarily on First Nations business. And, I guess the fundamental reason we're doing that is that, again, we'd like to see more First Nations people doing projects that directly affect First Nations people, but of course there are a lot of non-Indigenous people working that space. And the feedback we had is that that collaboration between two people in that situation can be quite powerful. And in fact, we last year did award a joint fellowship. And so in that circumstance, both applicants are both recognised and awarded as Churchill Fellows and funded individually. However, they're collaborating on the exact same project. So if that's you, again, I'd suggest get in touch with us at the Trust to discuss how that might work and how we can support that. If you're undertaking tertiary studies, so you might be doing a master's or something like that, that's perfectly fine. However, your Churchill Fellowship project can't form part of that study. So you can't say, I'm going to do this Churchill Fellowship project, and basically that's, you know, the content of my master's or something like that. So it needs to be separate. And the main reason for that is, you know, Churchill Fellowship's a lot of work. It's a big thing on its own, and we want to make sure that you've got the capacity and the time to focus on doing that. So have a think, if you are studying, whether now is the right time for you to also be doing a Churchill Fellowship. I think, you know, importantly though, when we look at personal eligibility, and there's always, you know, various rules and things like that, a Churchill Fellowship is for people from all walks of life. And that's something that gets thrown around as a saying. For us, it's an organisational mantra. When we say we want people from all walks of life to consider applying and we encourage them to apply, we actually do mean it. So in addition to personal eligibility, you might think about project eligibility. What projects can I apply for? And of course, a project has to be suitable for a Churchill Fellowship, which means you know, there's overseas knowledge and skills to be gained, and in some way bringing that back and sharing it will benefit the Australian community in some way. So you bring back and share knowledge, ideas, practices, or skills. You must demonstrate that you've really explored the topic in Australia to be considered. So, you know, this is a competitive process. So when you're putting your application together, and if you get an interview, you need to be able to convince us that you know what's happening in Australia, you've got an idea of what's happening overseas, you can see that there's things to learn there that could benefit Australia, and you need to go overseas to learn it. We don't want to send you overseas if we can see that you haven't learned everything in Australia that you could learn that will benefit you. So we really want you to be across what's happening in Australia. The project that you propose doesn't need to relate to your employment. It often does, and that's perfectly fine. Most people find that they're deeply passionate about whatever it is they work in on a day-to-day basis, and you've got the advantage of being in a position to do something with that knowledge, to implement something and influence something if you're working at the coalface. So that's perfectly fine. But equally, you might have a passion that sits outside of work, something that you're very deeply involved in, and that's okay too. So it doesn't matter. But, you know, I guess at the end of the day, the big thing here in terms of the project topics is we don't set limits on those topics. It really can be on anything, and that's up to you. Now, speaking of, you know, the project itself, the beauty of a Churchill Fellowship is that you design your own project. It's a bit like a choose your own adventure. You're deciding what the topic is, where you're going to go, how long you're going for, within the parameters of the Churchill Fellowship. It's pretty exciting. So if you can think of a topic, there really aren't any limits. We do offer some sponsored fellowships. So when I say sponsored fellowships, what that means is we've had perhaps a bequest from someone, they've left some money to the Trust so that we can award Churchill Fellowships on particular topics or themes. Or it might be an organisation, it could be a government department, a business, or an individual who is donating money to see people do research in particular areas. So as you might have noticed, we're doing information sessions on different themes. And this evening, our theme is access and accessibility. And if you look on our website, you'll see the list of sponsors. For example, one that comes to mind is the Rodney Warmington Churchill Fellowship. Rodney himself was a Churchill Fellow. He did leave a bequest in his will. He sadly passed away. And the topic he's looking for people to do fellowships in is around improving livability of our cities and communities. And so that's quite relevant for tonight's one. But what's probably important is people quite often get confused and a bit anxious about the sponsored fellowships. It doesn't matter if you don't select a sponsored fellowship in the application form. If you have a topic that really aligns and resonates with the sponsored fellowship, we'll pick that up anyway, and we'll probably award it to you or consider you for it. But if you do select a sponsored fellowship, that doesn't rule you out from being considered for a non-sponsored Churchill Fellowship, which is the majority of fellowships anyway. So I really wouldn't spend too much time worrying about it. If you see a sponsored fellowship and it really, resonates with you, then by all means tick the box, but don't get too worried about that one. When framing your project, it's really important to ask yourself, how will your proposed project benefit our community or society in some way? That's really, really important. So when you apply, as I mentioned, applications close on 1 May, they open on 1 March. So on our website on 1 March, sometime in the morning, early, you will see the application form appear and you'll be able to register, log into it and start your application. It's the kind of form that you can save and go out of and come back to as often as you like. So you don't have to do it all in one go. If you can't use the online application form, for example, you might have a screen reader that it doesn't want to play with, just contact us at the Trust and we'll find a way around that for you. So we don't want people to not be able to apply because our process was too rigid for them to apply. So please, feel free to contact us if you've got a concern about that. In relation to the form not being available now, it's not far away. There is a section on our website. If you haven't been there, go to churchillfellowships.com.au. The section on the website is called Become a Fellow. Everything you need to know is on that page and the links from that page. So the questions that we ask in the application form, there's all sorts of things there that are going to help you out. Even there's Q&As and there's generic feedback that we keep updating for fellows based on the things that they could strengthen if they weren't successful. So there's just a wealth of information on that part of the website. So spend some time looking at that, please. Churchill Fellows often tell us that the process of writing their application was really hard to boil it down to the short responses that we require, because there is a character count. But equally in doing so, it really helped them resolve some questions they had and hone in on what was important for their project. So spending time on the application is really important. A really important piece of advice or a tip here is don't leave it to the last minute. Like, don't leave your application to the last minute, because it won't be your best application. And you need to spend some time reflecting on it, thinking about it, working it through. This year, we're introducing a 60-minute video pitch, which will be part of the application process. So all you need is the tools you have now, so a camera and a microphone, whether that's on a mobile phone, a laptop, an iPad, whatever you've got. There'll be a link in the form, and you can record it and re-record it and re-record it until you're happy with it. That's no problem. And it's a 60-second pitch to let you tell us a little bit about who you are, what your project's about, what's motivated you to do it, and what the benefits will be to the community. So hopefully for some people, that'll be an opportunity for them to get through their passion, get their idea across maybe better than they could have in writing. So we'll see how that goes this year, but that's something new for the application process. So in terms of your itinerary, and this is important, this is probably one of the most important parts of your application. You need to think very carefully and be very clear on where you want to travel for that 4 to 8 weeks, depending on how long you choose. So don't overcrowd your itinerary. So don't propose a 4-week fellowship with 16 countries. It's just not going to be possible. And you probably find that you won't get shortlisted because the assessors will look at it and go, this just is not achievable. We don't think the person's thought it through. So really try and hone in on the most important places you need to visit, the ones that really will make it an awesome experience and you'll get the most out of it. Factor in some extra time. You don't need to jam pack your itinerary, your proposed itinerary, and try and prove to us that you're superhuman. What you need to do is factor in some time for rest, time to enjoy the culture and understand the environment you're in, because that's really helpful. And importantly, time to pick up those meetings you didn't know you were going to get until you get there. You start meeting people in other countries, you'll start meeting more people and opportunities will materialize. So if you've crammed your itinerary too tight, you won't be able to take advantage of that. So that's really important to understand. You don't need to worry about the cost. So in the sense of you don't need to work out how much travel will cost, how much accommodation will cost, all those things. We do that. You just worry about where you want to go and why, and getting yourself across the line with your application. We'll worry about what it costs because that's the bit that we sort out. So in terms of the selection process, we do have panels and committees in each state and territory comprising people from across a range of different fields and sectors with good experience in those areas. Applications are shortlisted. It's pretty similar, I guess, to recruitment in that regard, taking into account your referee comments. Interviews are held to determine who will be recommended for a Churchill Fellowship. And in New South Wales and Victoria, they actually have 2 rounds of interviews. So it's important to do the best job you can with your written application so that you can be shortlisted for an interview, because it is a competitive process. We'll have on our website the dates for when interviews are going to be held. They're all being sort of locked in as I speak. We have a regional secretary. That's a person who's a staff member for the trust in each state and territory. They'll be your contact person once you've submitted your application. They'll be in touch to let you know if you've been shortlisted, to organise an interview date and time with you. So that's all fairly well managed. So you don't need to worry too much about that. Around half of the people interviewed each year are likely to be offered a fellowship. So making it to an interview is a significant achievement. And the odds are pretty good. As I said, we probably aim to award around 100. In a fairly typical year, we'll get around 1,000 applications nationally. So it's sort of a 1 in 10, if you look at it that way. In September, our board will meet and all the recommendations from each state and territory come together and we'll make a final decision. So you'll be notified in around mid to late September. This year, we're introducing an onboarding session in early October. I think it'll be the 6th of October. So if you're feeling really confident, just scratch that into your diary, pencil it in. We're going to bring everyone into Canberra, which will be a fantastic opportunity to celebrate and to form a network of Churchill Fellows and share contacts and start that process. And we'll offer some training and some certain things to help you get the most out of your Churchill Fellowship. So again, when we're asked for tips about the application process, one of the best tips I can give you is to read and address the selection criteria, which I'll go through in a moment. Use as little jargon as possible and be as clear and succinct as possible. So our selection criteria is kind of broken into 2 parts, the project and the person. So in terms of the project, think about, the need for your project. You need to convince the selectors. What's compelling about your project? Is there a burning platform? Like, is now the right time for your project? Why? Why is now the right time for your project? Think about the benefits. Specifically, how will your new knowledge or skills benefit others? Who will benefit? Why will they benefit? Your itinerary I've just spoken about. You need to show the need to travel overseas. Have a clear focus. You don't know what you don't know, but you might also be exploring something very specific, but just be clear on what that is. Why did you choose those places? Who will you be speaking with and why? Now, an important thing to note here is you don't need to have contacted those people or organizations and set up the meetings. That's getting ahead of yourself. For the application process, you just need to identify who you'll be setting those meetings up with. Now, of course, once you're awarded a Churchill Fellowship, things could change and you might need to make some minor adjustments to that itinerary, and that's perfectly acceptable. So just plan out what would be the ideal arrangement for your fellowship. It doesn't hurt, if you're not sure, to make some preliminary investigations to find out if a particular organisation or person is open to meeting with people. So it might be an area where you think, I don't know if they take visitors. Well, in that case, it can be worth sounding them out. Excuse me, but quite often people find that when they're awarded a Churchill Fellowship, that gets them in the door. So that'll open a door as well. And achievability. So we want to believe that you're in a position to set out what you want to achieve with your project. So think about how you can convince us that you've got a plan. If you're awarded the fellowship and you learn all this new stuff and you come back, you've got a plan for sharing that, for implementing it, for influencing. That's what we want to know. What's the long-term plan? And in terms of you, the personal aspects of the selection criteria, why you? How can you convince us that you're the right person to undertake your project? How are you best placed to come back and implement change or influence others? Don't, my advice, seriously, don't just say, I will publish an article in a journal, because these fellowships are not only worth about $30,000 on average, they're much bigger than that. Think bigger than an article in a journal. Think about how you might actually influence some change and implement some things on the ground. When we're offering much more than just the overseas travel component now, there's additional funding you can apply for to help you disseminate your findings. We've got a range of different courses to skill you up in leadership and other things. We now offer impact funding, so people are applying for funding, additional funding to implement their projects on the ground. So this is a longer term thing. So keep that in mind when you're applying. What's your long-term plan to share your findings, to make a difference? That's really important. And remember, it is a very competitive process. You are going to need 2 referees, and this is all spelled out in the information on our website. 1 referee who can comment on you personally and your character, and 1 person who can comment on the topic of your project. My advice on that one is really straightforward. Get in touch with them as soon as possible and make sure they know that they're going to be asked by us through the application form to submit a reference. There's questions that they answer, and they're also available on our website. And make sure that they do it in time. Probably the saddest thing we see every year is it's the last day for applications, and we get phone calls from people saying that their referee hasn't completed it and they don't know how to contact them because they're overseas or something like that. We can't do anything about it. Once the closing date's there, we have to keep moving on. So get in touch, identify your referees early, get in touch with them, make sure they are willing to do it, they know it's coming, and they'll make the time to do it. So, as I said, it's highly contested, but that's not a reason to be shy. It's a reason to put in your best effort. So, I hope that you really do think about applying, and I hope that you're successful. We've got a small team based in Canberra, and we are always happy to answer your questions. We've got our phone number up there and our website. So on that note, I'll stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to introduce our first speaker for tonight, Katherine Webber. Oh, sorry, no, Ebru, I got that the wrong way around. Ebru Sumaktas. So she'll just turn on her screen momentarily, and I shall disappear and hand over to Ebru. And Emma might take Ebru off mute. Sorry, Ebru, if you can hear me, you're still on mute, so it might get you to. Well, I think.
Can you hear me?
Excellent. I was about to swap us to Katherine, but you're on fire now, so I'll hand back over to you.
Oh, thanks, Adam. Thanks for that. Okay, so my name is Ebru Sumaktas, and firstly, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the various lands on which we are all meeting today across Australia, and pay my respects to First Nations people, elders past, present and emerging. Okay, so I've prepared some notes. Yeah, essentially, just briefly about myself. So I have worked in the disability sector for approximately 20 years in various capacities as a disability advocate in both New South Wales government and more recently in the federal government. And in those 20 years, I developed a keen interest in meaningful, sustainable and long-term employment for people with disability. Now, I am also a professional who was blind, a mother of a young child, and my passion area with diversity and inclusion, there's a very obvious agenda. I had a clear idea in my mind in terms of what I wanted to do with my career, and could see leading disability employee networks in New South Wales government from fellow colleagues that felt that the attraction, the retention, the career progression, the accessibility and the inclusion was lacking. And subsequently, I also had identified that over the course of the 2 decades, we had multiple national inquiries, we had multiple state, territory initiatives, strategies. We had a number of productivity reports, all of which made no difference really in the attraction, retention and employment of people with disability. We were still ranked 21 out of 29 of OECD countries, which is quite poor, and only 52% of people with disability in employment as opposed to 83% people without a disability. So that's just essentially a little bit about myself, and having sat on various boards, I knew that this was something that I really wanted to do. So also I've got a degenerative eye condition called retinitis pigmentosa that was identified when I was 12. And because of the nature of its degenerative nature, what it's meant is that over the years, I've had to essentially develop skills to maintain my employment. And that's always something that's at the forefront of my mind. And hence this keen interest in the area of employment. You're constantly acquiring skills, or rather losing skills faster than you're gaining them. And I thought, well, what are we doing with respect to people with disability who are neurodiverse or have an intellectual cognitive disability in this space? So I have a friend who is a Churchill Fellow, and she had encouraged me to look into it. So in summary, it took me the best part of 2 years to convince myself to apply, and that I was worthy of applying. I honestly thought that, it's just so competitive, and I don't think they would even consider my application, let alone a person with disability. Because if you can appreciate working in this space, often people with disability experience genuine discrimination, whether it's indirect or direct, ignorance-based failings around employment and the nature of their skills and capabilities. So I think that took me about two years before I thought, no, actually, this is actually a worthy topic, and I'm going to apply. So in my application process, and Adam spoke to it as well, essentially, I didn't actually get awarded the Churchill Fellowship in my first application, and essentially that was primarily because I took a very broad brushstroke, and the feedback that I got from the panel was that they're looking for something that's going to make a social impact. So public interest, what's your topic? It needs to have a public interest across Australia and for Australians. How can you bottle it and bring it back to Australia, then adopt it into the Australian context? And my topic for that first year was just far too broad. So in my second year, I subsequently decided to take a more narrow deep dive approach and looked at examining successful and sustainable disability employment pathways in Austria, Germany, the UK, and the United States. So, look, Adam touched on very key points. The application process is quite tight. You have a very, very tight word limit. For those of you who haven't read Smart Brevity, it's just come out. I wish it had come out when I applied back in 2017. Keep it concise. So identify what is it that you're trying to achieve, how will it benefit the Australian border public, why you, and how are you going to then disseminate those findings? What networks do you have? That's a real opportunity for you to highlight. I'm going to, disseminate my findings through this board, through presentations and this opportunity. That was the one thing, and like Adam said, start early, because honestly, between March and May, you're going to need that time to really, narrow it down, start big, then get more and more concise with what it is that you're applying for. Now, if you are like me and you have a disability, whether it's obvious or hidden, I would strongly encourage you to speak to the team at the Trust. Honest to goodness, hand on heart, they were my biggest cheerleader. Honestly, it's going to get me emotional, but they were willing, they were able. They bent over backwards in accommodating me, the application, and even more so during the whole experience. So it does not matter in any way, shape or form if you're sighted or not, if you've got a mobility disability, if you've got caring responsibilities, you're a mother, a father, caring for your elderly parent, it doesn't matter, they will accommodate you. So please don't let that hinder your application process or even, your thought of consciousness in terms of just concentrate on the application. So also my other tip is, and Adam also touched on it, you will be asked for a professional and a personal reference. Think big in this instance. So I have sat, as I've mentioned, on a number of boards, and have worked with senior leaders. So I asked one of my friends and colleagues who happened to be the Australian Human Rights Disability Discrimination Commissioner, Alistair McEwen, to provide a personal reference because we had worked together on a board capacity when he was the CEO and I was on the board, and in various other settings. And I think if you can get someone at that level to add credibility to your application and your topic, your chosen topic, it adds a lot of gravitas, because who else is there to say this is a really essential topic, the Human Rights Commissioner. So, not all of you, obviously, I appreciate, will have that level of access, but I think the stronger your references are, the better credibility it will give to your topic area. Okay, and so I did mention that I applied twice. I sought feedback. Again, the Trust, they're very responsive, and I encourage you to do so. They give great advice, and look, I took that advice on, applied it in my second round and was successful. Now, apologies, I'm reading my screen reader as we go. Okay, so next, my experience on my travels. So I actually travelled for 10 weeks. and was funded for 8, but I took a 2-week break in between and travelled the Balkans. But I just want to rewind a little bit. So as you can appreciate, I applied the first time. The second time, I felt a little bit more confident, but it's very competitive. So when I finally got that call, I was absolutely, completely and utterly elated. And I don't know how many of you are on this call, but I mean, honestly, I threw myself a Churchill party because I was just so happy that I was awarded this Churchill Fellowship and to be able to represent the country as a Churchill diplomat abroad on this really crucial topic. So it's life-changing. It truly is, and it does open lots of opportunities. So as Adam pointed out, and I will too, I'm sure Katherine will as well, really be mindful of your schedule, because your brain will be fried after meeting with these subject matter experts, and then them connecting you with other subject matter experts, and you're taking up all these opportunities. You're also being asked to go out or invited out to dinner, or you should really map a day on either side, and particularly if you've got a disability, make sure that you make the trust aware of that to accommodate for that extra day if you need that. So I think there were some occasions for me, particularly in the UK and again in Germany, where I thought that I had crammed far too much, purely and simply because I was being asked to connect with other subject matter experts. The highlight for me during this experience was just meeting individuals that are equally passionate, who have trialled, tested, failed in employment pathways, that I still speak to now on a regular basis. Their wisdom, it was just incredible. But moreover, the fact that I was actually able to share this experience with my support person, my biggest cheerleader, my mother, who the trust funded to come along with me and to provide that support as a blind person. It honestly was just there's just no words to really explain it. It was amazing, beautiful. Another highlight was meeting Dr. Frank Hoffman from Discovering Hands, and I'll make this really brief because I'm sure I'm going over time. Dr. Frank Hoffman from Discovering Hands, he's a gynecologist, a general practitioner who runs his own surgery based out of Germany. And he had this thought bubble after having, in quick succession, a number of patients that came through who had breast cancer, and he felt like the 15-minute consultation simply wasn't long enough to do that, breast examination, and thought of a very dear friend of his who's blind, who has a heightened tactile ability, with their sense of touch being heightened, and then subsequently developed, which has now grown and morphed into this, a career progression, an area that he's just like midwifery come up with, and it's tactile medical examiners. So he started off with a trial based out of Dusseldorf in Germany of 60 blind women who were screened and went through a very extensive 2-year training on how to tactually examine a woman's breast for breast tissues and any abnormalities, in psychology, in also management of client-patient files. This model has now expanded across the globe, across continents, and has also now gone into male health with male medical tactile professionals looking at prostate cancer. I'm going to show you these beads. So by the time a woman goes to their doctor, having identified a lump in their breast, it's usually at these stages, which makes it a lot harder for treatment. If they see a medical tactile professional, they can be picked up with these beads here, which is quite small, which makes the treatment a lot more successful. So not only has Dr. Hoffman created an industry for women who are blind, he's also saving lives. It's amazing. So this is what the Churchill Fellowship and this experience has afforded me, being aware and made aware of these various projects globally. So when you come back, it's not all done, it's not all complete. You do, like Adam said, you have to produce a report. I also took up an opportunity to have my report published by the University of Technology, Sydney, and their ePress team, which was then peer reviewed and published. So you take up as many opportunities as you possibly can to disseminate your findings, and you will be afforded a number of them, which is just amazing. Going full circle, this Churchill Fellowship has also enabled me to work at the Australian Human Rights Commission with Dr. Ben Gauntlet, who's the now Disability Discrimination Commissioner, on his one of his term commitments, includability, which is looking at enhancing meaningful employment in Australia, and more recently at the Disability Royal Commission into Violence, Abuse, Neglect and Exploitation in their economic participation team. So it does open doors. It's an incredible opportunity. I strongly encourage all of you to apply and wish you all the best of success. I also do want to take this opportunity to invite you to reach out to Churchill Fellows that do your research. Have a look at Churchill Fellows that have done a topic similar to yours. And if it's recently, perhaps think about changing your topic area, reach out to them, call them, contact them. And of course, I'm also available to be contacted should you have any questions regarding accessibility or the experience as a whole. I'll hand over to you, Adam. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ebru. That was really fantastic to kind of hear and relive your experience, and you're a great advisor as well. And I second that. All Churchill Fellows are always happy to talk to other people and give them some tips. So I would now like to invite Katherine Webber to turn on her camera and get ready to present. Katherine is passionate about social justice and inclusion, and she's a social planning practitioner with over 14 years of experience working for a range of government and non-government organisations. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to you now to do your presentation.
Great, thanks very much, Adam, and Ebru. I love listening to your presentation. It is a joy hearing what other Churchill Fellows got to achieve, and I always learn something new. I'm joining today from the Bundjalung Nation and would like to pay my respects also to elders past, present and emerging. My fellowship explored access and inclusion from a policy perspective. So I personally don't have any permanent disability or caring responsibilities. I had worked with different communities in local government and internationally, and public toilets kept coming up as a challenge, and I couldn't find the work that was being done here in Australia. So I applied for a Churchill Fellowship, and this is a little bit about my journey. So yeah, I agree with all of the tips that Ebru shared about the application process. My fellowship was 8 cities in 8 weeks. And some of those were really busy weeks. So I went to the Commission of the Status of Women in New York, and that was 10 days of, I think, probably 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. Full days of different meetings and workshops, and it was just this wonderful energy. And then I think I went to Scotland, and I had two meetings booked and only one eventuated. So there's ebbs and flows of the Churchill Fellowship. So I went to Portland, Oregon, New York, I went to London, Toronto, Ottawa, Amsterdam and Berlin, and got to meet with a variety of different people. So I was meeting with toilet manufacturers, advocates, academics, local governments. And one of the ways I documented my Churchill Fellowship was by Instagram. So I'm going to share with you some of the pictures of toilets that I took, because, you know, that brings me joy and hopefully will bring you some joy as well. So this was one of the not so great public toilets that I found in New York, that obviously they decided that cutting the doors off halfway was the best way to deal with antisocial behaviour in that place. But one of the highlights I had was going to Portland, and I had connected via Twitter with a group called Flush, that's Public Hygiene Lets Us Stay Human. And so we'd been connecting via Twitter, we'd had a few emails back and forth, and I arrived and they had a whole week of activities booked for me. There was drinks at the local pub, there was visiting the local council, met an academic, went to a visit of a homeless camp, met with a toilet manufacturer. So when I put my application together, I said, yeah, Flush would be a great group to connect with, and left it at that. But once I was there, the program just expanded and built over the time. Whilst you're traveling, you're meeting people, they're also recommending other people. Some of the meetings were set up in different cities whilst I had been traveling. So there was a variety of different ways that it had happened. One of the highlights also was, this was in Portland, meeting the manufacturer of this toilet. It's called the Portland Loo, and looking at the design features of this. And it was designed because there was a very large homeless population, so it's large enough for people to go in with a shopping trolley. And they have to, so while we deal with heat waves and floods, they in Portland have to deal with very cold environments and water freezing. So, you know, got to get into the really gritty details of design features, but then also talk about the policy impacts as well. This is an example in the Netherlands of the Urilift. So no one wants a public toilet outside their business, yet public urination, particularly of nighttime, is a problem. So during the day, it's under the ground, and at nighttime it pops up. And you'll note in the image on the right, there's security cameras out the front. So, you know, there's benefits and challenges of designs like this as well. The Churchill Fellowship has had a massive impact. This is me talking at the graduation ceremony, and I just love the photo of me in the middle because I was so excited and I was talking about toilets. So if you've got a passion and you look that excited when you're talking about a topic, this is when you need to apply. This was also the sign language for toilet. There was an Auslan interpreter, so I made everyone do the sign language for toilet at that. Now, I hadn't done a lot of work around public toilets. I'd identified as a gap before my Churchill Fellowship. Now I talk on the radio about it. I've spoken to 2 ABC journalists this week, which is a bit of a shock. It's also really fantastic because it's a way that I can distribute the findings. I participated in the policy impact program, which is something that returned fellows can participate in. So I got to go down to Canberra. We wrote another shorter paper and presented our recommendations directly to politicians. and then was some of those stories were then covered internationally as well. This morning when I was interviewed on the local radio station, they called me a global leading toilet researcher, and I was like, fantastic. You can do a self-proclaimed description. My LinkedIn profile is a international toilet enthusiast. So my Churchill Fellowship has not been related to employment. It's something that I kind of do on the side. I am now progressing it with a master's degree, a research degree to get further into the topic. And so the Churchill Fellowship has definitely been a bit of a jumping point for me to do that. Also, as part of the application process, you do need to be succinct. Normally, you only get 3 minutes to talk about anything. So I hear that you've now got a 60-second video recording. So the Churchill Fellowship really asks you to be succinct. So really look at ways to communicate your passion in the shortest amount of time possible. So that was kind of all I wanted to share, but I'm happy to answer any questions, or also you can contact me via the Churchill website, and happy to help with applications as well. So that's all I had to say.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Katherine. That was amazing. Our international leading toilet researcher and toilet enthusiast. And Ebru and Katherine, I might actually ask you to bring your cameras back on now. Everyone is still online. We've been answering some questions as we go, so you can see them in the Q&A panel under answered. And I think there are a few people saying thank you to both Ebru and Katherine for your amazing presentations, which is great. So I'll just take the remaining time to go through some of the questions, and I'm sure we'll get some more coming in. Someone has asked, as a traveller with disability, is there a capacity to add a rest days within their travel schedule to support their needs when travelling without affecting the program timeline? So I'd say, look, you can add, we want people to add rest days anyway. And I think if you've got a disability or a medical condition that requires you to, space out your time, that's not looked upon negatively at all. Use your time. So absolutely maximise that time, take those rest days. And importantly, I think if you're comfortable, let us know so that we can offer any other support that might be needed. Someone's asked, do you need to have set organisations or people to visit before you go, or can these be established at least in part when you're there? So I think there's two answers to that question. The first one I think is very important is when you apply, almost everyone else applying is going to be very clear on where they want to go, who they want to meet with, and why. So your application won't look very strong if you say, I'm not sure yet where I want to go. So I think fundamentally, you need to be really clear on those places and those people that you want to visit. However, there are going to be opportunities that you don't know about that you will establish when you're on your fellowship. And that's fantastic. That's like the secret, exciting bit of a fellowship, are those meetings that you didn't know you were going to get when you're on the fellowship. So you've kind of a bit of both in that regard. But it's really important with the application. You need to be very clear on where you want to go and who you want to meet with and why. So you've got plenty of time. Applications don't close until 1 May, so you can really do your research, go online, talk to people, contact other fellows, have a look on our website and see if there's other fellows that have done similar topics in similar areas, and talk to them about some of their ideas about who you might be able to meet with. Katherine?
Adam, just to add to that, I ended up flipping my travel. So originally I was going to go to Europe and then to the North America, but the opportunity to attend the Commission of the Status of Women came up. So I had a similar start date to my travel, but I flipped the travel and went to North America first. So there is some of that flexibility between the application process and the travel.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And things can change that are out of your control, so you need to adjust. Sonia's asked if you already have a project underway, but want to obtain more international knowledge to make further impact here in Australia, can you still apply? And the answer is absolutely. I think will be a clear demonstration that you're doing something and you're going to come back with knowledge and keep doing it and hopefully do it better or differently. So absolutely. Somebody had a question, Ebru, for you. They've got a similar or the same eye condition, and they wanted to know a bit more about how you went about traveling internationally. Did you have any tips in relation to that?
Yes, I do. So I discovered that my very old iPhone wasn't compatible with some of the, the navigation stuff, and also Uber. So I had to find I had to buy an iPhone that was a newer model so that I could actually do that. So make sure that you go with an iPhone that is compatible with, some of the apps that we've got for navigation, Uber, taxis, all that sort of stuff is one. The other is I sent not only my bio, but I also sent a consent form to the subject matter experts that I was meeting with, just to ask that if it was okay for me to record those meetings, and they've all consented, and I've still got those recordings. I also used Fiverr to get those recordings transcribed for the report, so that it would help me, identify what some of those thematic learnings were, and themes. That's the tip. And if you need a support person to go along with you, perhaps not even the entire time, but part of the time, just consult with the trust, because that's what they're there for, and they're more than, like I said, willing and able and very encouraging.
Excellent, thank you. So regarding meetings that you might have planned in your application, do you need to show you've made contact with the organisations or people? No, you don't at all. I think I always give people advice, if it's someone hugely ambitious who you want to meet with, an international figure of great renown, or the head of a large organisation or a minister in a government department, you might want to be able to tell us that you at least know that they would be willing to meet with people like you, but you don't need to have approached them at all. I think that's quite reasonable. If you know your topic, will the trust help connect you with people or places to visit? No, because you won't have got a fellowship if you didn't know who they were. So you'll need to work that out for yourself as part of your application. And, we can give some advice if you're struggling. So I had someone contact me today trying to get our help to make some meetings happen, and we can try where we can, where we've got some of our own contacts. I always suggest people contact embassies, Australian embassies in the countries they want to go to. They can be very helpful in helping you set up meetings. Someone's asked, how do you decide which country to go to if your topic could be done anywhere? That's a good question. I'm not sure. I mean, that's really, again, up to you. It's you need to be the one that tells us, paints a picture of this amazing learning opportunity you're going to take on. If it could be any country, I'd say stay here, do it here. So it really depends on you. Someone's asked about feedback. That's an interesting one. And Ebru did mention feedback. We can't give feedback individually. I'm sorry, with over 1,000 applications, we just don't have the capacity to give individual feedback. We do have generic feedback available on our website. We're always updating that, and that's really based on every year's. We sort of go through all the applicants. I go to almost all the interviews, and so I can sort of look for the things that people generally need to pick up on. So that's worth reading through. It's on our website. Our Churchill Fellows associations, which are alumni groups, they're comprise Churchill Fellows. They're always happy, so you could discuss with them, show them your application, talk it through with them, and they'll give you some of their tips and experience, like the two guest speakers we had tonight, and that's always quite valuable as well. Someone asked, how long does the final report need to be? Well, It's a good question. We don't put a limit on it, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a written report. So you might like to do an audio report. You might like to do a video report. I would say, generally the sweet spot for reports around 50 pages or so. Some people do reports that are 120 pages long. It depends. If you only want your mum to read it, make it really long, but we don't want it to be too long. We want it to be accessible so people can read it. You may do an additional attachment or something like that if it's getting too long, but just think about, you want people to read it and engage in it. And it's always great to have pictures, if you can get pictures and images to bring it to life as well. That's highly valuable. We do give some advice and some training on the report. So if you're successful on that onboarding session we're going to have in October, we'll have a session about the report and give you some tips and some tricks about how to do that as well. Someone's asked about how to balance or accommodate the potential fellows' business interests and how their learnings can be used for the community. So if I sort of interpret that question the way I think it's intended, it's perfectly fine if you're going to benefit as a business. I mean, you come back and implement your learnings and findings and have an amazing, successful business. That's great. You probably end up employing people and it's really good for the community. But what you can't do is come back and say, I'm keeping all this information to myself. You need to be able to share information. There may be some things you find that are commercial in confidence that you learn and you can't share that, and that's okay. You can be upfront about that, but you do need to be willing to share what you can with your fellowship when you come back. So I hope that answers that question. Is it a good thing to record meetings and interviews? I think, Ebru, you spoke a little bit about that. I think if you get permission from the people, Katherine, did you have any thoughts about recording interviews?
I think it depends on who you're meeting and what the purpose of it is. So when I was meeting, when I was getting a tour of a facility, no, I wouldn't. I got to go to some production spaces and that wasn't really suitable. I took a lot of notes and still have those notebooks. But and I know another fellow would spend hours each night typing up all their notes from the day. I think it really depends on what process you feel most comfortable in to capture that information and record it. Yeah,
that's a good point. And I think the getting permission and the comfort level of the people you're meeting with is very important. Quite a few fellows use tools like there's one called Otter AI, which is you can just have that on your phone. It's an app and it just translates or transcribes the verbal interactions into writing. It's pretty good. So that can help you a lot in terms of taking notes later on as well. Someone's asked if you can choose multiple countries. You bet you can. So you can choose one country if there's a real need to just go to one place. You can choose multiple countries. It's really completely up to you. So you can really have a good time with that one. And have a look at our website. All the different fellows are listed, and have a look at the places people go to and what they do. That might give you some inspiration and some ideas. Bradley said in some countries or cultures, the expectation is to swap business cards and a small gift. So can we assist with helping to understand the cultural sensitivities and help with production of cards and gifts? So we absolutely give you artwork so you can create some business cards. I've seen fellows do some pretty cool things recently online. It's pretty cheap. They use the artwork that says they're a Churchill Fellow and it might have a QR code on there or something like that. People are getting creative. Gifts is really an individual thing. Bear in mind your luggage weight. You might not want to carry too much with you. So think of things that are small, but gifts are very common for people like to exchange and think about what that might do. And
can I add to that?
Yeah.
So I got a business card made. I had a friend who was a designer and got pictures of toilets and got a toilet pin. So a brooch made and stuck it on the business card. So that was always a bit of fun as a way of giving something and also helping identify who those other toilet enthusiasts out there. So that was appropriate for who I was meeting with.
How about you, Ebru? Ebru, did you have anything to share on that one?
Yeah, look, I also created a card and made it in Braille as well. And I took things like, those little mini Vegemite things, just for like a bit of a laugh, and some Tim Tams. And look, they really appreciated it. But yeah, if you're going to a number of countries, you've got to consider the weight and the heat, because some
Yes,
of those Tim
Tim
Tams.
Tams.
Yeah.
Imagine. Just quickly, welcome to Sarah Brown. She's joined us. She is a fellow from Adelaide, works for Zoos South Australia. I think fairly recently returned as well. She says she's happy to help out anyone. So look up Sarah Brown on our website. She did a hybrid due to the pandemic, so part travel, part virtual, and she found it really worthwhile. So she was looking at the role of technology within zoos and aquariums and how to activate the connection to conservation. So yeah, look, thank you, Sarah. We appreciate that. Not only do we have fellows presenting, but they're participating as well. That's awesome. Someone's asked whether the 60-second video pitch is compulsory or just an optional extra. So don't see it as an optional extra. If there's a reason why you just can't do it, get in touch with us. But it's really, it forms part of it. And I think for some people, it's going to be a real opportunity to get that passion that Katherine spoke about, to get that through in 60 seconds. And it's a long time if you try and do it. Some people said to me, 60 seconds isn't long. Trust me, if you're trying to, deliver a pitch in 60 seconds, it's a fair time. Are we anticipating more applications this round post-COVID? Look, yes and no. So I'm anticipating more applications than last year. Last year, we had about a 25% drop in applications, and that's because we were just coming out of COVID. You couldn't travel. The war in Ukraine had just broken out. There was a lot of uncertainty, and I think people just weren't ready. This year, I'm hoping we get back to the, around 1,000 or so applications. That would be great. It's a little hard to anticipate, but we're seeing really good interest in our webinars. But hey, that's not a reason to kind of go, oh, well, I won't apply this year. Please, if you're thinking about applying, seize the moment and do it. I've got 2 more questions and about 3 minutes. So Sarah's saying, being a wheelchair user, she's looking at the fact that we've had previous Churchill Fellows or who are wheelchair users. Is there a database of accessible accommodation, or is that up to the individual? We don't have a database, so it largely is up to you. But that said, we're very happy to connect you with fellows that have done their travel in recent years who are wheelchair users. I'm sure they would love to share what they know with you. Someone's asked about knowledge within Australia. If you work in a state, I guess, health is a good example where it's a bit different in each state and territory, sadly, across Australia. Can that be your demonstration of knowledge? Yes, it can. So we don't expect you to be the expert across everything in Australia, but certainly within the topic you're looking at, that's fine. Someone asked the success rate. So I guess very broadly speaking, it's about 1 in 10. If we have around 1,000 applications, we award around 100 fellowships. That sort of gives you a sense. I think that's not bad. It's a lot better than buying a touch lotto ticket, that's for sure. A lot better. So last question, how do the fellows handle doing the Churchill Fellowship while working full-time? Do you take extended leave? That's a really good question. So, often people will talk to their employer before they've applied or while they're applying. That's a really good tip. Sound them out. Some employers will give you paid leave if they can see the benefit in you bringing back that knowledge and doing the fellowship and the gravitas that comes with it. Others might say, look, can you take some personal leave and we might give you some leave. Others say, look, you can take your personal leave. In extreme cases, people quit their jobs, and that's pretty hard to do for most people, but some people do. If they don't get the leave, they say, I'm quitting, and off they go and do their fellowship. So it's really an individual thing and depends on the circumstances. So that's where we are at that one. So look, we're at 6:30. I would like again to thank everyone for attending, including Sarah and other Churchill Fellows lurking in the background. Thank you to Ebru and Katherine so much for sharing your experiences and presenting this evening. If you're applying, good luck and good night.
Good luck, everyone.
Thank you.